Something big is changing in student loans, and most people aren't paying attention yet, but they will, especially when the bills start showing up. Because after July 1st, 2026, the rules around borrowing for graduate school won't just shift a little, they're getting completely reshaped. And for a lot of students chasing careers in fields like nursing, education, or social work, the path forward could suddenly get a lot more expensive or a lot more limited. Imajaz. I have a master's in finance, and this is where things start getting real. The conversation around student loans usually focuses on forgiveness, interest rates, or monthly payments. But this overhaul is different. This isn't about how to repay loans, this is about whether students can even afford to take them out in the first place. Right now, there's a system in place that gives graduate students a certain level of flexibility. If federal loan limits don't fully cover tuition and living expenses, there's a backup option. Graduate Plus Loans. That program has been quietly doing a lot of heavy lifting, allowing students to bridge the gap between what they're allowed to borrow and what school actually costs. That safety net is going away. And at the exact same time, new borrowing caps are being introduced that depend entirely on how a degree is classified. Here's where the first major shift happens. Under the new framework, not all graduate degrees are treated equally anymore. Everything hinges on whether a program is labeled as a professional degree or just a standard graduate degree. If a program qualifies as professional, students can borrow up to $50,000 per year, with a lifetime cap of $200,000. But if it doesn't, that drops to $20,500 per year, with a total cap of $100,000. That's not a small difference. That's a completely different financial reality. Now here's where things start to get controversial. The list of what counts as a professional degree is surprisingly narrow. It includes programs like medicine, law, dentistry, and a few others with very specific titles. But many careers that people would absolutely consider professional, like nursing, education, and social work, aren't being included in that same category under the proposed definition. And that's where mistake number one starts to form, even before anyone takes out a loan. A lot of students and families assume that all advanced degrees are treated the same when it comes to federal aid. That assumption is about to become very expensive. Because if someone plans for a graduate program thinking they'll have access to higher borrowing limits only to find out their program falls under the lower cap, the numbers stop working almost immediately. Think about the cost of many graduate programs today. Tuition alone can easily exceed $30,000 to $60,000 per year depending on the school and field. That doesn't even include housing, transportation, or basic living expenses. Now compare that to a borrowing cap of $20,500 per year. There's a gap there. A big one. And before 2026, that gap could often be filled with Graduate Plus loans. After 2026, that option disappears. That leads directly into mistake number two, and it's one that doesn't show up until it's too late. A lot of students might assume that if federal loans don't cover everything, there will always be another option. And technically there is. Private loans. But that's where things get risky. Federal loans come with built-in protections, income-driven repayment plans, potential forgiveness options, flexible deferment. Private loans don't operate the same way. They're based on credit, income, and market conditions. Interest rates can be higher, terms can be stricter, and protections are far more limited. And here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Not everyone will even qualify for private loans. Students from lower income backgrounds or those without strong credit histories could find themselves stuck in a situation where federal aid isn't enough, and private lenders won't approve them for the rest. That's not just a financial inconvenience, that can completely derail someone's career path. Fields like nursing and education already rely heavily on students pursuing graduate degrees for advancement or licensing requirements. If funding those degrees becomes harder, fewer people enter those professions. And that creates ripple effects far beyond individual students. Now layer in another change happening at the same time. Several existing repayment plans like SAVE, PayIE, and ICR are being eliminated and replaced with a more limited set of options. So not only is borrowing becoming more restricted, but the flexibility in how those loans are repaid is also shrinking. That combination matters more than it might seem at first. Because when borrowing is limited and repayment options are tighter, the margin for error disappears. This is where mistake number 3 starts to take shape. A lot of families focus only on getting into the program, choosing the school, the degree, the career path. The financing piece becomes secondary. But under this new system, financing isn't just part of the plan. It is the plan. Choosing a program without fully understanding how it will be funded could lead to situations where students either don't finish their degrees or graduate with a financial structure that's difficult to manage long term. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Nearly half of graduate students attend part-time while working. Under the new rules, loan amounts for part-time students will be prorated, meaning they'll receive even less funding than full-time students. So now the situation becomes even tighter for those trying to balance work and school. Less borrowing capacity, fewer repayment options, no graduate plus backup, and stricter definitions of which programs qualify for higher limits. All of that adds up, and it shifts the entire strategy around higher education. Instead of asking, what career makes sense? The question becomes, what career is financially possible under these rules? That's a very different conversation, and it's one that more students and parents are going to have to start thinking about sooner rather than later. Because by the time these changes fully take effect, the window to plan ahead will already be closing. And the biggest risk isn't just higher costs, it's making decisions based on outdated assumptions. The tricky part about all of this is that on the surface, nothing looks dramatically different right away. Colleges are still offering the same programs, career paths still look the same. The idea of going to graduate school still feels like a natural next step for a lot of people. But underneath that, the structure holding everything together is shifting. And when that structure changes, the pressure moves somewhere else. In this case, it moves directly onto students and families. Because when federal support becomes more limited, the responsibility for filling the gap doesn't disappear. It just gets transferred. That's where the real impact starts to show. Take a student planning to become a nurse practitioner. That path often requires a graduate-level degree. Under the current system, there's a reasonable expectation that federal loans, combined with Graduate Plus, can cover most of the cost. Under the new system, that same student could be capped at $20,500 per year, with no Graduate Plus option to make up the difference. So now the question becomes, where does the rest of the money come from? Savings might cover part of it. Family support could help in some cases, but for many, those options aren't enough. That leaves private loans as the most likely fallback. And this is where the shift becomes more than just numbers on paper. Private loans don't function like federal loans. Approval depends on creditworthiness, income history, and often a cosigner. Interest rates can vary widely, and repayment flexibility is far more limited. That means two students in the exact same program could end up with completely different financial outcomes based solely on their access to credit. And not everyone gets approved. What often gets overlooked is how private lenders evaluate risk in a way that can quietly shape someone's entire future. Credit scores, debt-to-income ratios, and even employment history start to matter just as much as academic performance. A student could have strong grades, clear career direction, and acceptance into a solid program, but still face barriers simply because the financial profile doesn't meet a lender's criteria. That creates a situation where access to education becomes tied not just to merit or ambition, but to financial background. Cosigners become a major factor, and not every student has someone who can step into that role. Even when a cosigner is available, that adds another layer of responsibility and risk, often extending beyond graduation. Interest rates can shift over time depending on the loan structure, which means the total cost of borrowing may not be fully clear at the start. Variable rates in particular can introduce uncertainty that makes long-term planning more difficult. Monthly payments under private loans don't usually adjust based on income, which removes a level of flexibility that many borrowers rely on during the early stages of their careers. This can create pressure to prioritize higher-paying roles over meaningful or necessary work in lower-paying sectors. Over time, that kind of pressure can influence career decisions in ways that weren't originally intended. It's not just about whether a loan is approved, but about the conditions attached to it and how those conditions play out over years or even decades. Financial stress doesn't always show up immediately, but it builds, especially when repayment terms are rigid. In some cases, borrowers may end up refinancing just to manage payments, which can further change the structure of the debt. All of this adds complexity to what might initially seem like a straightforward decision. The gap between federal and private lending isn't just about interest rates. It's about predictability, protections, and long-term stability. When that gap becomes the primary way to fund education, the entire experience of borrowing changes. And for many students, that change won't be obvious until they're already committed. Students from lower-income households or those without strong credit profiles may find themselves unable to secure the funding they need at all. That's when plans start changing. Some may delay enrollment, others might switch career paths entirely, and some may never enter the field they originally planned for. That has broader implications, especially in fields already facing shortages. Nursing, education, and social work aren't just career options, they're essential services that communities rely on every day. And many of these professions require graduate-level education for advancement or licensing. When access to that education becomes more limited, the effects don't stay confined to individual borrowers. They ripple outward. Another layer to this is how the changes interact with repayment structures. Several well-known repayment plans, Save, Pay, and ICR, are being phased out and replaced with newer, more limited options. That reduces flexibility on the back end, just as borrowing is being restricted on the front end. So now the entire life cycle of student loans is changing, from how much can be borrowed, to how that money is repaid, to what safety nets exist along the way. And all of this is happening at once. There's also an often overlooked detail that makes things even tighter for a large portion of graduate students. Nearly 43% of graduate students attend part-time, often while working. Under the new rules, loan amounts for part-time enrollment will be prorated. That means even less access to funding for people who are already trying to balance education with income. So instead of easing financial pressure, the system could increase it for those who can least afford it. Now step back and look at the full picture. Lower borrowing caps for many graduate programs, a narrow definition of what qualifies as a professional degree, the elimination of Graduate Plus loans, changes to repayment plans, reduced support for part-time students. Each of these changes reshapes a different part of the system. Together, they create an entirely new environment. And navigating that environment requires a different mindset. Decisions about education can't just focus on passion or career goals anymore. Financial structure has to be part of the equation from the very beginning. Understanding how a specific program is classified becomes critical. Estimating total costs versus borrowing limits becomes essential. And thinking through repayment scenarios is no longer optional, it's necessary. Because the margin for error is shrinking. A decision that might have worked under the old system could become unsustainable under the new one. And that's where those three mistakes really matter. Assuming all graduate programs are treated equally when it comes to funding. Relying on loan options that won't exist in the near future. And making major education decisions without fully understanding how they'll be financed. Avoiding those mistakes doesn't guarantee an easy path, but it does reduce the risk of running into problems that are difficult to fix later. Because once a program starts, options become more limited. Switching paths can mean lost time, lost money, or both. And that's why awareness now is more valuable than ever. These changes aren't theoretical. They're already set in motion. And while there's still time to prepare, that window won't stay open forever. The students and families who understand what's coming will be in a much stronger position to adapt. They'll ask different questions. They'll compare programs differently. And they'll make decisions based on a clearer picture of the financial reality ahead. That alone can make a significant difference. Because in a system that's becoming more restrictive, clarity becomes one of the most valuable tools available. And those who use it early will have more options than those who wait. If this helped break things down in a way that actually makes sense, stay connected for more conversations like this. Because changes like these don't just affect one group, they reshape the entire landscape of higher education.